Hey, good morning, everyone. If you are joining us live, if you are catching the replay, that's great too. The important thing is you're joining us here in the huddle. Happy Friday. JT here for those joining us in the huddle for the first time. The huddle is where I sit down with other successful people from the world of sport and coaching. And the reason we do that is to learn about their journey to greatness. Why is that important? Because success always leaves clues. I am really enthused for my guest today. We have been connecting and I've been trying to get him on for a little bit. So I'm glad our schedules aligned so he could come on today. My guest in the huddle is the manager of football operations and running back coach at the University of Guelph, Stevenson Bone. Welcome into the huddle.
It's a pleasure to be here. Our coaching backgrounds with you and I go way back. So it's finally great to join you.
Yeah, no, again, it's always love connecting. And before we get into it, Stevenson, what I really love is that I feel like you are a friend that I remember it'd been a couple of years since you moved to Guelph, but when we were down there for the high school offset track and field meet, it was like we reconnected. It was like right back to like shooting the shit in the coach's room, and just like it felt like we were right back, like we hadn't skipped a beat. So
it was that summer of 2014, 15, and 16 that you were the receiver coach. I was still at Western playing quarterback, but helping out in the summer and coaching the quarterbacks when I could with you guys. And yeah, you're right. It felt like no time had passed actually when I saw you. So no, it's great to be back here and chatting with you.
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing I will remember from that weekend was when you gave us a tour of the facilities that you and your coaches have at University of Guelph. Again, you got a suite set up, by far one of the best facilities I've ever seen. Very US inspired. So again, definitely love that. Giving us the tour around.
It is special. You are right. It's and hopefully we can continue as this pandemic kind of winds down. I like to use the word winds down. We can host OFSA and other great events back there and get people, to see it as much as we can, because it is special. It's, I think it's one of the best in Canada. If I was a player coming out of high school, maybe it might have changed my mind, back in the day, but it is really special. And, there's been a lot of questions about that facility and when can we go back. Our players are clamoring to return. So hopefully in the next little bit, they can finally step back through the doors and kind of enjoy what they've all earned. Right.
So in the huddle, Coach, we really like to get behind the mindset and really start to look at why do successful people achieve great things. So before we get into that, what I would love to know is, you come from a very high achieving, high performing family of athletes. I am curious, what role has sport played for you in your life? And maybe what's one lesson that it's really taught you?
Well, I mean, you're right. I started as young as I can remember playing sports, youth leagues, everything from baseball, hockey, football, you name it. We were always in team sports, more so than individual sports, but always in team sports. I was very fortunate to have a father who was involved in football. But he never was pressuring my sister and I to ever sit there and try to become athletes. I think the competitiveness that both my mom and my dad have probably rubbed down on us a little bit. And that's kind of why we gravitated to that. But as far as I can remember, we were always going to, Little League baseball games and football games and basketball. I mean, the amount of hours my mom must have spent driving us to and from practice, both me and my sister, I can't even imagine. And my dad too, you know, so they both were there for us when we were growing up. And I think the big lesson that I learned to kind of to the second part of your question was at an early age, especially in team sports, you know, the ability to try to overcome and try to win at all costs. You know, we always played sports for fun, but as you transition from being extremely young and trying to, you know, have fun into kind of getting older, and as the pressure started mounting and you started realizing, you know, you're not as special as you think you may be. And that realization probably hits you when you're around, you know, grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, as you start transitioning into, you know, you get the upper tier and the lower tier in terms of, you know, they're on the A team or the B team. And that's kind of the first realization that, you know, okay, I really have to either take this seriously, or I just really want to enjoy myself and kind of do it for fun. And sometimes, you know, both answers are great. And that's why I always have had a lot of respect for people that, you know, at all age levels played sports, because I think the lessons that you learn when you're playing sports at a young age, it's irreplaceable. Yeah, and that's part of the reason that I'm so hopeful that, you know, Ontario as a province can turn the corner and get this pandemic over with, because of the amount of opportunities, not only at the university level, but just even thinking back to everyone's own childhood. You know, the countless little league baseball games I can remember, you know, eating popsicles after with my teammates, and all those little memories of stuff. You know, the rally caps, you know, being down like 7-0 and winning in the bottom of the ninth, you know, and every kid's going crazy, high on sugar and everything. You know, that sort of stuff, you know, you can't replace it, or you can't replicate it. And I think that genuine love for sport, and no matter what sport it is, I think is so beneficial to young people. And I think, you know, that I know that that's why we were involved in coaching, and why we kind of, you know, initially tried to give back to the community when we were both on the junior Mustang staff, because we weren't getting paid the millions of dollars and we were putting in a lot of hours. But it was for the benefit of those kids to get better, to potentially have a fantastic season, to win, but also to have fun. And, you know, and that was at the, you know, the highest level of probably competitive football in Ontario at the time, especially in high school. And we were one of the top teams. But even then, you know, our coaching staff was always talking about trying to have fun, you know, trying to encourage each other, things like that. And I think those lessons are so beneficial. And, you know, I always ask people, even when I meet them after, you know, in the athletics world and in the football world, oh, did you play high school football? And you can't, you know, when I always sit there, I find it so surprising the amount of people that I've run into just working at the university. I go, yeah, I loved it. It was great. I wish I could go back and play high school football again, because it's sort of sport at its purest form, in terms of, you know, you're all there with your friends, your buddies, the people that you grew up with, and things like that. And it's not just football, it's all sports. But I do like football more than the other sports. That's why I'm coaching football, obviously. But I think it's that sort of reason that we're coaching, and the kids that they can bring out, the lessons that they learn, I think are so beneficial. Teamwork, you know, common goal, having fun, trying not to take yourself too seriously, and then getting out of your comfort zone. And I think that's the key piece, is trying to do something that maybe you're not great at yet, but at least trying, and making mistakes of, you know, of aggressiveness and not passivity, if that makes sense.
It's interesting to hear you share, because as you went into it, I really heard a lot of lessons that, yes, they were in sports, they were on the football field, but really they were opportunities for personal growth, for self-development, for self-actualization. And I love what you shared, that a lot of it is about getting to know yourself.
Yeah.
And it's so important, because knowing yourself is what I often tell people is, it's like the first rule to being great, is you have to know what your motivators are. Like, do I want to perform and compete at the highest level, at the university level, or do I just want to play for fun and rec, which is, like you said, great, but you got to know what drives you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a ever evolving piece to it as well.
Mhm.
Your motivations. I find, on a team of, even coaching right now, to use an example, on a team of 110, I think 110 guys is what the league mandates. People play for a variety of different reasons. Some play because they absolutely love the game. Some play because they like the game. They don't necessarily love it. They like it and they're good at it. And so they sit there and they think, you know what? Yeah, I like it. And then some probably don't even like it that much. But at the same time, they've been sort of coerced or gone down that path of, you hear it all the time, you're a big guy, you're a big kid, you should be playing football. And it goes through other sports too. And I'm not saying that's the main percentage of people. I think it would probably only, when you get to university, maybe 5 or 10. But the 20 that absolutely love it, or the 30 that absolutely love it on the team, those people, they set sort of the precedent for the others to follow. And that's sort of, when I always use that example of it, you always have to kind of find out the person's motivations and why they're playing. Why are they doing what they're doing? So we have those conversations. I used to previously coach the quarterbacks, and I would ask them in 2019, why do you like doing this so much? It's not normal to sit out there and take shots, and sort of get your butt whipped for 60 minutes, and physically it's not great after the game. Going into the ice tub, it's your shoulders are sore, maybe your ribs are hurting, your head might be hurting, you might have a headache, you never know, right? It could be any sort of reason. And you say, why do you do this? Why do you enjoy it so much? And they all have a variety of different reasons. So some of them don't have a good reason, but then when you get into it, they sit there and they can always you can always find what their motivations are. My family, I really enjoy, competing. I like, certain aspects of the game. I like the camaraderie. There are all these little different points and pieces that you can always kind of think about, and that people will disclose to you, that always tells you why they enjoy and what their motivations are, at all levels, right? And I think it's the coach's job to try to sit there and try to find what those are, and then to try to build upon them, so that you can sit there and try to get the person as motivated as they want to be, and then they possibly can.
And just that, what you just shared there, finding out what people want, speaks volumes about who you are as a leader. And it's interesting that you talk back to when you first came out, when we first met each other and started working together, London Junior Mustangs in 2014. I mean, you were still in university.
Yeah.
And here you were coming out to coach, right? Some of the best football players in the province. You're a couple years older than them, but you meshed so well. And I mean, there were some strong, confident personalities there that coached a lot of football. So I've always sort of admired that about you, is that you're very calm and confident in your own skin. So is that something that you've always had, or is that something you've learned through the process of, being an athlete, or just, in your own personal growth and self-development?
Well, I think it's ever evolving. I think it's changed. Obviously, you get confidence when you complete something, or kind of check off your own personal goal. But yeah, I was in second year at Western. It's kind of hard to believe that I was only probably, I think 20 would have been my age in 2014. So yeah, coaching 18-year-olds that ended up being a lot of my teammates in the future, which was comical and kind of fun as my career winded down. But I think growing up around coaches obviously has a big reason for my development. I was always with my dad at football camps, things like that. So I was always able to kind of be involved in that way. I think it's funny. It sort of changed when I did get to Western, and when I ended up playing. I think it kind of gave me a little bit of confidence. Like, I was able to kind of achieve what I wanted to do in this sport. And then I could kind of let go in terms of, it didn't really bother me as much about what other people thought as when I was younger, maybe in high school, as I was growing up. It was always was always kind of nervous and maybe a little bit fearful of failure, which is something that you kind of have to, it's definitely in your mind and it's definitely right in front of you. But after I kind of sat there, and I remember thinking, if I could just play in one game, I would have made it. If I could just suit up one time, I would have made it. Then it was, man, if I could just get one touchdown, I would have made it. And then it was, I could just play in one game, if I could start a game, if I could, and every single time you get confidence with setting goals and achieving them. And so I think that's sort of why I was able to kind of mesh with those coaching personalities, because I sort of let loose. I didn't necessarily have a filter, which as I'm getting older, I've realized is probably a little bit better to have and a little bit more wise, in terms of maturing and that sort of thing. But I was never kind of afraid, I think, when you're referring to 2014, 2015, 2016 of kind of what people thought, especially in the coaching realm. And I feel like, it's when you're really confident in knowing something that you really feel passionately about, like if you actually truly believe that you know something and you do know it, then there's no reason why you shouldn't ever try to get that point across or try to get, to explain yourself in that way, if that makes sense. So I was confident in my knowledge and my ability and what I knew. And so then I was trying to sit there and go, it doesn't matter my age, as long as I can sort of pass on that information to younger people and things like that, coaching. Then I thought, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to hold my tongue. And, now what I do is I take more calculated risks, I'd like to say it. So I'll still voice my opinion, but I understand that there's, I was young, I was still learning kind of that coaching business and things like that. So, no, but I really enjoyed those times. And I thought, I think to answer to come full circle and answer your question, I think it's still evolving. I don't think you're ever finished trying to learn and trying to sit there and evaluate how the best way of kind of coaching and bringing your own expertise and point across to people. Both your coaches that are on the same staff as you, how do you respect them? And then also, how do you get the point across the most effectively to the athletes that are involved? And that's sort of the process that I was so fortunate to be involved with the London Junior Mustangs at that young age, because, it taught you so many lessons just about relationships and things like that.
And what I'm hearing from you is that idea of inspired and focused action, right? For you, like that's the only way to build confidence, is by actually doing the thing that makes you feel a little scared at the time.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I always try to highlight to people is the truth of the matter is most people never go for the things they truly want because they're so fearful of, what other people think, and all these stories they make up, where, like you said, it simply focus. It's simply about taking one inspired action. Like you said, okay, if I dress in one game, boom, that it's one touchdown. And it's constantly elevating that bar. And as you do that, your confidence grows. And as your confidence grows, it's just more opportunities come your way.
Exactly. And knowing, even if you don't achieve those goals, trying to sit there and revisit, okay, why did maybe that not occur? And also, my self-worth is not directly, engaged with those goals. So I'm not less of a person just because maybe I didn't achieve what I set out to. Now, I struggled that a little bit at the tail end of my career, where most of my playing time came at the start. And it's always kind of funny because I always sit there and think, wow, I was so much better, after all the knowledge that I gained at the end of my career, yet most of my playing time was at the beginning. And so I always was, that was an interesting conundrum, thinking, man, I watched myself back when I was younger. You didn't know what was going on, but now you do, yet you're not necessarily playing as much as you wanted to. And that was always a struggle, but I always had to kind of sit there and tell myself, it's okay. You're still very, very talented, and trying to build yourself up mentally from the inside out, and knowing that even though you didn't necessarily become an all-star that year, because you didn't start, you weren't the guy that was playing, that didn't make me less of a person that could offer, and also it didn't make me less of a leader that could inspire my teammates through actions. Because realistically, when you're on a team, yeah, the games are super important and that's why everybody plays. But like 99% of the interactions that happen with teammates are not during the games. They're during the workouts, they're during the practices, they're just during the kind of all the other activities that we do kind of off the field. So that was kind of my opportunity to sit there and try to develop myself as a leader and try to ultimately help our team. And that's sort of what I still kind of preach to guys that maybe, they feel that frustration at our level of, I can't contribute, I'm not making a difference. And I sit there and think, well, no, you kind of can it's your mindset that can kind of set your goals and how you want to kind of impact your teammates. My father had a great line, and he always asked, how can you make, the key of playing quarterback was not being the best yourself, but how can you make other people around you better? And he always preached that. But I always took that as, it's not just quarterbacks, it's every position. So I even tell that to our running backs, how can you develop, your younger guys that you're playing with and teach them things that maybe, you can pass along, because that's ultimately what football is. You play, you get taught by coaches, you kind of move on, maybe you become a coach and you sort of pass down the knowledge of the coaches that you liked and the information that you gathered. And then you try to tell yourself, okay, I didn't like those guys and I didn't think they had much to offer. So I'll try to never, have an athlete that has those same experiences that maybe I have at a certain point, right? So I think that's kind of the mindset that you have to have. Your self-worth isn't necessarily connected to the goals that, you may or may not achieve.
It's great that you're talking about the whole idea of self-worth, right? Self-image. And it's one of those things that in the world of sport, at least when I was growing up, it's something you don't talk about. But one thing I always stress to any of the clients I'm working with is you can never outperform your self-image. So whatever you think about yourself, and you can talk all this stuff, and this is why fake it till you make it never works.
No.
But do you truly know yourself? And I love how you talk about leadership and you tied that back in, because it's this, a good leader wants people to think highly of them, where the goal of the exceptional leader is about getting the people that are following them to think highly of themselves, right? So like you talked about, it's raising people up. It's about getting people to believe in themselves more. And when you elevate, that is where the magic starts to happen.
Exactly. And I can think back to some of the best leaders that, I've ever come across with it. And there's probably a few that stick out in my mind, but, in terms of a peer, I would sit there and say, Jean-Gabriel Poulin, who was a linebacker, who I played with at Vanier College in Montreal. He was a cheetah like me, and then he ended up becoming an all-star linebacker at Western. And he since has retired from the Montreal Alouettes, but I think his ability to kind of inspire his teammates, not only through actions, but through backing it up. And I mean backing it up at all points, on the field, off the field, during games, practices, workouts. He was full go. And he encouraged everyone around him. That was kind of the rare quality that he had as a leader. Never backed down from a challenge. Didn't matter the situation of the game, never mattered the score. He was going to always, try to go 100%. That's just how he was wired. And he made other people around him, especially on defense, that he played middle linebacker. He made those guys around him so much better. From off the field decisions to on the field play, I mean, to the amount of workouts that they went to, the effort that they gave at workouts. That was a person who could galvanize, ultimately a team and a unit. And it didn't just stop on defense, it went all the way over to offense. And you sit there and you think, wow, that is special in terms of, now I'm not saying that other guys didn't have an impact on that. There were a lot of guys that had an impact on that. But in terms of someone that I've known for, a long time, probably since 2010, 2011, when we first ended up playing together at Vanier, he was always the same person and always, that sort of leader. And then in terms of a coach, obviously I've had a lot of great coaches. There's too many to name. I mean, they're all of them have had such unique ability to put stamps on positive impacting players' lives. But the one that I always sit there and I think is unique to my situation actually has nothing to do with football. He was a coach that started of all things, actually a music program at one of my high schools. And when he first got there, the program was in disarray. There wasn't any funding, there wasn't anything. But by the time I left, they had one of the highest ranked programs in all of the school systems, I think in like the Northeast United States. I grew up in Connecticut. And his ability to sit there and change a culture at a school and mapping out the time that it took to do that, and knowing that, there are so many challenges that you have to overcome in order to achieve that, and still having the clear mindset of, okay, this is where we're going to get to, this is what we're going to do, and trying to get everyone around him to rally to that cause. And I mean, going to the last, degree of detail. That's something that I sit there and think as a coach, it translates, doesn't matter what field you're in. If it's about team and it's about sort of sports or athletics where the results are not quantitative, it's not business, it's not a bottom line, it's qualitative experiences, it's how people feel. And the results can't always be measured in quantitative means. Yes, wins and losses, but at the same time, it's also the positive experiences and influences that you may have on people. His ability to do that was uncanny. And I've always sat there and thought, wow, if I could, whenever I'm presented with a situation, I always think of the great peers that I've been able to, be around just playing football. And Jean Gabriel's one that comes to mind that's relevant for me. There have been plenty others, not just him. And coaches, I always think of that one individual who knew nothing about football, couldn't tell you how many downs there were, couldn't tell you the size of a field, knew nothing about sports, but knew what it meant to form a group and those group dynamics, and how to change a culture and how to, kind of get everyone focused on that one task and creating little goals to get there along the way. So those two always kind of pop in my mind as leaders that I would like to sort of emulate myself. But right now they are definitely way better than I am at those tasks. So, and that's what ultimately you do. That's what coaches do. They try to pick the best pieces of individuals that have impacted them throughout their life and try to, focus that on all their energy on trying to make not only the people around them better, but, better develop themselves.
It's as you share all these experiences, what really came up for me is seeing how diverse, like how open you are to learning from different people that, not just football coaches, but, people in your life, and how just being so open to new experiences. And it sort of gave me some context on how your football career has transitioned, right? So you finish up, you're part of the Vanier Cup winning team, and then you sort of transition into the coaching, right? And then, opportunities in the CFL, right? So what has it been like transitioning from a player to now seeing it more from the coaching side, the business side of things? What has that process been like for you?
Initially it was very hard because I always talk about going to the CFL as being awesome, and it was a fantastic experience. But picture a situation where you've played a sport your entire life You absolutely love it. You've played it at probably one of the highest levels that you can in North America and around the world. I mean, realistically, football in Canada, people don't realize how good it is. And I've been fortunate to play both in the US and in Canada and see some of the best quarterbacks. I'm a coach at the Manning Passing Academy, and to see some of the best quarterbacks in the country, Joe Burrows, the Trevor Lawrences, the Gardner Minshews, all those guys throw in real life and meet them and things like that. And you sit there and you see guys like, Chris Merchant, Hugo Richard for Laval, Michael O'Connor from UBC. And you go, you know what, those guys, Adam Sinagra from Calgary, they're not far off in terms of talent. And that translates not only at the quarterback position, but to a lot of positions. So, playing at that level, and the U Sports level, and then transitioning to the CFL was tough because you're around a sport that you can't play anymore every single day, right? So a lot of people, they transition into a lot of other fields. They transition into, insurance and into business, into doing, teaching. I know guys that are cops and firefighters, and they basically do every single thing that they can to not be involved with the sport anymore. And that isn't because they don't like it anymore. It's just because it's so hard initially, that clean cut break, where, a lot of other sports, golf, tennis, even hockey to that extent, you can sit there and play recreationally. Football, you just can't get that same level of feeling that you had when you're operating at a really high level in terms of timing, accuracy, everybody being in stride. I mean, it's a choreographed dance in a way, right? Running an offense, like it's incredible. If a single guy's out of place, it can mean the difference between a touchdown or a touchdown the other way. So that feeling, I feel like when I transitioned into playing or to kind of working in football, initially was tough. Now I've actually moving more in from the operational side and the business side into coaching. It's kind of given me a little bit more of that playing experience, because I'm able to kind of sit there and go out on the field and throw the ball around with the quarterbacks and things like that, and talk about some of the things that I was thinking while I was a player in terms of details and things like that. So I feel like that transition's a little bit easier. It kind of alleviated some of the issues of being involved in football, but not necessarily playing football. So I really enjoy the coaching aspect of it. And like I was telling you before, I always kind of wanted to be a coach, which is weird. A lot of people, they want to be players, and then once their career ends, they want to be, whatever. And I always wanted to kind of coach initially, because, you have to always remember, my dad was a coach at the time, and I sit there and think, wow, like that's really cool. I really want to do that. So I always played almost a coach, which is a strange way of looking at it. But yeah, I think kind of transitioning initially was hard. Now it's gotten a lot easier, and I love being involved in it every day. No one's ever at peace with when their career ends or why it ends. Football, I'm not sure who said it, but I've always heard this kind of saying that football hates you. It tries to make you quit. It never tries to make you injured. It never, allows you to have a lot of, experience. You never end on your own. It always tells you that you can't play anymore. You love football, but it really doesn't like you. There's very few people that get to end, with a win, with an undefeated team. So I'm very fortunate when it comes to that.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's always tough when Father Time tells you it's time to hang up your cleats, and you can't go out there on Saturday afternoons anymore. But I'm at peace with it. I'm really happy with coaching. I think that it's reinvigorated my kind of passion for the sport, and I'm really looking forward to not only this season, but just kind of making this a full-time career. I really enjoy it, and I'm really, really happy with where I'm at in this stage. And it's been recently, I guess, probably 3 or 4 months ago, named the head coach for the London Junior Mustang, or the Guelph Junior Griffin
Yeah.
organization,
Okay.
for the senior varsity team. So that would be another great challenge, of coaching kids in high school. And it's my first head coaching opportunity, but one that I feel like I'm really ready for, and one that I've been honestly looking forward to since I was probably 10 years old. So as crazy as that sounds.
Mm. Just again, I've known you for a few years, and one of where I know why you'll thrive in that position as a head coach is something that every high performer knows. And I mentioned this today on a post that high performers hang around other high performers, right? And whatever you want to say, iron sharpens iron. And because you're so open to observing and learning from other coaches, like you said, you've almost been able to cherry pick. Oh, I really like this quality. I really like this quality. Not that you are trying to copy that person, but you're so open to seeing what works, what hasn't worked, that you've almost built this amazing foundation over the last 7 years, and I guess of active coaching, but watching Dad, that you're going to be so ready for it because you've put in the time, you've put in the reps and sets to prepare.
I'd like to hope so. I mean, we always, you're always judged in football, especially at that level, even in elite summer football, and wins and losses, much like that teacher I was talking about previously. I know that it's small steps. They didn't have a program a few years ago. They brought it back. And then obviously the pandemic happened and the entire season was canceled. So we're hopeful, in terms of trying to rebuild it from the ground up. But I think, you bring up a good point. I've always tried to be an observer of great coaches, from the Greg Marshalls at Western, who I've spent a long time with. I knew even since I was a kid, he's a master technician when it comes to offensive line play and in terms of running offense and things like that. I always just tried to pick up as much as I could from him. My dad's a master technician of the quarterback position. I mean, I can't even describe to you how much his knowledge he has. And I'm still learning from him today on things that I wouldn't even have thought about previously, that, he's gotten to such an advanced standing and then, the coaches that I currently work with, from Coach Mark Soria, who's at Laurier and U of T previously, Coach Ryan Sheehan, the University of Guelph here, the head coach, and even on the defensive side, Coach McPhee and Coach Carter. They each have something that's unique to them and why they're in this position in their life. And you'd have to be foolish to not recognize, okay, they have some sort of expertise in some sort of area in regards to the field that they're currently in. And if you sit there as a coach and you're kind of this, narrow sighted in terms of, I just want to kind of stay in my lane, you'd be foolish to not sit there and try to gather information from some of the best minds that I've been fortunate to be exposed to. And I sit there and sometimes I have to pinch myself because, I'll be talking with my friends and hearing about their work problems. And I kind of sit there and think, you know what, I have a really cool job. I get to do what I like to do, and that's hard enough to try to find that at a any age, let alone the age I'm at. So I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in. But at the same time, I always try to improve, and I'm always trying to sit there and nitpick from people, and at the same token, when I was younger, I always had a few coaches, like everybody does, that they don't necessarily agree with, or they don't agree with their methods or the reasoning behind why they do certain things. And you sit there and you write a little mental note and you say, okay, if I'm ever in that position, I will, handle the situation this way. And that's what I would say to young coaches or people that are aspiring to kind of get into the field. I don't think it's necessarily, you have to always find a person. Okay, I'll use the analogy of songwriting. Okay. A lot of people, they sit there and they say, oh, I can't write a song because I've never tried it. Right. But there's an exercise that they always talk to people about, writer's block. And they say, if you can picture your favorite artist, okay, that you like listening to, you put yourself in their shoes. How would they write a song about this situation? So you're not writing it as Justin Suey. You're writing it as, Eminem, or whomever your favorite artist is, right? And then in that retrospect, you can sit there and say, okay, yeah, I think he would think about that situation this way. And that's the same with coaching. You always have to sit there and try to pick a person that you'd say, okay, if this situation ever presented itself, how would that person react? And you have to find who's that sort of person for you. And I always think, what would my father do in this situation? Because morally, I mean, he's a great man. And so I would sit there and think, okay, he would probably want to, take that route. And that's probably the right answer. So I always try to find, and I encourage people to try to find that for them. What person in your life has impacted you in a great way that you think would do the right thing? And always ask yourself, when you're presented in a situation, how would you react in that situation? What would that person do? And then in coaching, even more so. So you have a situation, that happens, or plenty, and it sits there and it rings a bell for you. Write it down, write it out. I have a notebook of things that I just keep to myself about situations so that I can refer to it in the future. And I can sit there and always go, oh yeah, I remember that situation. We did this, I would have done this. But at the same time, was I right or was I wrong? Who knows? But at least you have that on file. You can always access that information. So that's sort of what I do. I don't think that there's some magic pixie dust that you can just sprinkle on yourself and say, you're great at what you do. I think it's just trying to sit there and come up with a whole list or a memory bank of situations and experiences, and just trying to pull from them in order to make an informed decision.
I love hearing you share, because you can really see that quarterback mind, really like the ability to pinpoint details, the ability, like that attention to detail, that like, okay, what worked well? What can I do better? And just that, having that mindset is invaluable. And what I often share with people is, instead of just studying, like trying to copy what does that person do? Listen to Coach Bone here talk. It's about, how do successful people think, right? It's all mindset. It's life is simple. Okay. We sometimes complicate it, and we all do it, myself included, but success in life is 95% mindset, 5% strategy. Listen to the things that Coach is sharing. That's how you win. That's how you win. And I refer to it, the effortless way.
Yeah. And the other great line, Justin, I think you're spot on with that assessment. I always would talk to our quarterbacks and our guys and say, whenever you're talking to a teammate about a problem, and this is another funny line that I got from my dad, but he says, whenever you're telling someone about a problem that you may have, 80% of the time, they really don't care. And the other 20% of the time, they're probably happy that you have that problem. So try to keep those to yourself. How can you solve those the best that you can? Trying to look within first, and then go and reach out to coaches and things like that. So I always ask, it's a great line whenever people are complaining and things like that. So I always kind of bring that up. But you're right. I think there's always sometimes you're right. The decisions don't have to be your own. You can always sit there and try to think about, what your parents would do, what your favorite person in the world would do, what coach that influenced you the most would do in certain situations that apply to all realms of life, and not just on field things. It's dealing with, family problems, dealing with any sort of thing that you can sit there and think about in your life, career goals. And I think with young athletes, especially, we're trying to not only just prepare them for an OUA season, we're trying to prepare them for the next 40 years of their life. So having it, sort of the reason that it's regimented, that you have to show up on time, that you have to do all these right things, it's not because we sit there and think, okay, if you're late, Justin, by a minute to the lift, it's really going to impact us in the future, winning a championship. It's not about that. It's about the lessons that you have to learn in order to be ready for the next 40 years. Because if you show up to that business proposal, that you're not there on time and you get fired and it affects your life negatively, ultimately, that's sort of what we're in the business of doing. It's developing young people, and it's both on the field and off the field. And I would sit there and say, that's why the word is student athlete, right? And some programs, not to name them, but some of them, it's a little bit of a lip service when they say that. And some really do care. They really care about the well-being of student athletes, and and trying to make sure that they fully develop, and giving them opportunities with alumni and with events and things like that, where they can sit there and meet their peers and meet people that they want to be in the same field as, or whatever, like in terms of preparing them for kind of the next step, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I love it because, I think back to the last couple of weeks in the huddle, I've had Coach Bird on, Coach Falls, and it's the same thing, right? The most successful coaches, and again, you have some great ones at Guelph, they understand that football is about, it's the tool to teach them how to be better young men, to be better future husbands and fathers and sons. And when you really come at it from that perspective, that is the game changer. Right?
Yeah,
and that's
and
what's about.
Coach Shane at Guelph, his father, much like my father, was involved in football for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a head coach that his only season of being a head coach was 2019. And I think how he was so successful in his first year is probably that reason. He could sit there and bounce ideas off of his dad, but not only off of his dad, but also the experiences that he's had with his father. And he probably views that, and I'm just using an example, he probably sits there and thinks, morally, how do I make decisions? Well, what would my father do in that situation? You don't always have to explicitly ask him. You just have to make that decision on your own based on the morals that a person that you look up to would bring. And, being around a sport for such a long time, he would have a lot of experiences, way more than I would ever have in terms of being exposed to football. And I think that's why, in 2019, we came swinging out of the gate, and, we're ranked number 3 in the country, and we're right there in terms of having a great year. And I think 2020, if it had happened, would have been a fantastic year for us, but we are super optimistic for 2021. We have an unbelievable recruiting class coming in, and I just think that sky's the limit for our coaching staff here, and hopefully we can really build a winner. That's kind of the goal.
Definitely. So here's what I would love to ask you. Last question.
Sure.
Is we are just coming out of an interesting time, and depending on when people are watching this, right, we've just ended probably one of the most interesting times of human history. And there are a lot of people struggling right now, a lot of challenges, maybe with their health, maybe they've had a relationship breakdown, maybe financially, they're really struggling. Maybe life has just really knocked them down. What I would love to know from you is, what is one thing, one action that someone can take today just to get back up, to create some momentum, to create kind of that little bit of confidence, just to get the ball rolling so they can get back on their journey to greatness?
It sounds really simple to find one thing. And I would sit there and say, actually build that plan. I know that sounds really kind of a simple, but building the plan and having it written out in front of you in terms of how do I get to achieve what I want to do, I think would be the first step in anybody that's struggling in terms of trying to advance their career, their family, in that realm. I think it's always important to have written down goals and stare at them and look at them. But people always look at the mountain. I use that example. People always see the peak of the mountain, but they really struggle with the path to it. But you have to write down the top of the mountain, but then what are all the little steps that you have to get there? So for me, the peak of the mountain, I mean, I think anybody that ever wants to go into coaching would love to coach at the highest level. Everyone wants to be the coach for, an NFL team. But there's never a chance to sit there and go, well, tomorrow if I don't get that, I'm a failure. You know what I mean? It's simple, small steps. Now that may never happen, and it doesn't mean I'm a failure. I may be a university coach. I may never be a head coach. Who knows? Right. But it's setting those steps or setting those things. Okay. A coach once told me, he said that the best thing that you can do in your current situation is become a master of what situation you're currently in. And I always thought about that as being sort of complacent. But I realize now what that means. It's so that when you actually do get a chance to move on, you can sit there and think, wow, okay, that happened because I was excellent at what I did. People that are always searching for the next thing, the next job, the next move up, more or less, I think are kind of looking at it wrong. They have to sit there and try to become the best in their position. And that's how they get noticed. That's how they move up in terms of jobs and things like that. There's too many lateral moves and things of that nature trying to sort of advance careers. In terms of, and that's sort of on the business side. But on the personal side, we've had a fantastic opportunity to spend a lot of time with our loved ones. Obviously, in this past year, it's been some more cumbersome, I think, than others. I always hear people talking about, oh, I've had to spend so much time with my kids at home, things like that, working, da 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 da. And my family's had the unfortunate problem of being sort of separated by this border closure. And so for our family, it's probably been the 1 year where we haven't seen each other the most out of anybody. And so I think you always kind of have to sit there and look at everything through a lens of, yes, this is what our current situation is, but there may be other people that are affected by this more so than I even could imagine. And I'm not saying that we're affected more than other people or whatever, but you always have to sort of put it in perspective of the grand scheme of things. Just because your situation is this doesn't mean that someone's situation isn't that. And you'd much rather be in your situation than that person's situation. And it's viewing it sort of through that glass is half full versus half empty situation, where I sit there and I think that's how we can kind of come out of this. I look at the small steps that we're trying to start in Guelph. We're trying to get a flag program back and running on its feet in July and in August. So if anybody out there on Facebook is watching, we will be announcing stuff on Gryphon Instagram page regarding flag football. Hopefully that you won't charge me for any advertising space.
It's all good.
But yeah, we're trying to but that's small steps, right? We can't play tackle football tomorrow, but those athletes that have missed out on seasons, maybe you should look at playing flag. It's not the same thing as tackle, but it's an alternative. And it's those small steps and, writing down your goals and things like that, I would sit there and say to people are probably the best way out of, this challenging time that we've been in, and the other thing I would say is move on, right? Like once it's done, move on from it. Just focus in the present, right? Don't worry about what happened, back last year, this year, before COVID, after, it's only what is important now, right? And that's sort of the motto that you and I spoke about previously, but it does ring true. It's trying to put things in perspective so that you can move forward and through the lens, that positivity lens, and there's thousands and thousands of ways to help other people, and not just through sports, but through, community, through tons of things, volunteer opportunities. And some of those experiences are the most rewarding experiences that you can ever have, I think, helping other people. So if you're ever dealing with a situation where you feel like you're overwhelmed, think you can always sit there and volunteer, and it puts it really in perspective for you about how good you may have it. And then sometimes that's the light that goes off with people, and they go, okay, you know what? I can overcome this challenge or this situation that I may have thought was the end of the world, but now it's in perspective for me. I can sort of write down my goals and move forward. And I think that's sort of the message that I would tell people, that I would preach as a coach.
Mhm.
It's always about the next thing, making sure that you stay in the present and trying to just focus on today.
Mhm.
Right, for young athletes, write out a calendar, write out a schedule, work. I always talk about with our kids and academics, get a day planner, write out your week. When can I fit an hour in for training? When can I do a little bit of throwing or catching or running? It's time management skills ultimately that end up sort of, I think, are the difference between people that are sort of bumping along the road and the people that are really trying to get that car into the next gear, and move forward, right? So
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
sit there and preach that as the one thing that people can do better.
Okay.
But I appreciate you having me on. It was very deep conversations today.
Yeah.
I like the channel. I think it's great where you're going with
Yeah.
this.
So what I would love to know is, I'm sure there are lots of people there that you've piqued their interest with the flag.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think you've highlighted that Guelph is an amazing destination for any student athlete. And I share that too, because I know some of the student athletes that I've worked with are there now and loving their experience. How can people get connected with you, Coach?
Yeah. So my email address is up on the Gryphons Football webpage,
Mhm.
so they can find me up there. I'm currently I guess the football manager of football operations for the
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of exciting things coming this summer in terms of programming for flag, that we're going to be trying to start up, and we're just trying to get our players ready for this season. So it's a busy time. We were able to start training last week. So today actually is the culmination of week one, back running, throwing, weightlifting. We actually moved all of our weights outside, so we're able to kind of work out in small groups
Yeah.
and get back and be ready for the season. So it's a busy time for me, but I absolutely love hearing from people, and they can find me on Instagram too. I think you have
Yeah.
my tag up there,
Yeah.
and then through email. I'm not a big Twitter guy. I've never been a big Twitter guy. I find I'll be reading it for hours and hours and hours. So
Yeah.
I try to steer clear of Twitter.
Okay.
I know it's an important recruiting tool, and that's
Yeah.
basically the only reason I would ever use Twitter, is to
Okay.
try to message a recruit or try to find a recruit or information about someone. But yeah, it's a dark rabbit hole if you go down that for you'll look at my phone and I'll be 2 hours later and I sit there and go, where did the time go? So time management, no Twitter.
Okay, I'll be sure to share everything in the description there, folks. I'll share Coach Bones, all the social media handles. First and foremost, Stevenson, I really wanted to acknowledge you. I've really been able to see, firsthand. I've been able to watch from afar, just watching your growth and evolution, and watching you, from a young student athlete at Western to where you are now. And I really want to acknowledge you for the man you are, right? The son you are, the brother you are, the coach you are. And this conversation just really inspired me just to see you and where you're going to go in this. And I'm so looking forward to just watching you in your first head coaching role with the junior Gryphons, because I know it's just going to be, again, it's just going to be amazing to watch you put your stamp on that, and watching you continue to grow and evolve. So
I appreciate that, Justin. And same with this channel. I know you found your passion, and it's great to see you positively impacting people of all realms of life. And not just Lucas football players. I know they miss you. I'm sure they do. And the athletes that I get to talk to, they say it was a fantastic time when you were their head coach. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Well, brother, I have a feeling with our paths crossing with Ontario football and stuff that, just in the football world, I feel like, again, it'll be fun to watch how the journey continues to unfold.
Exactly. It's just the start. It's not the end. Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, Coach. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into this conversation. Here's what I want you to do. Coach shared so many amazing nuggets about, what it takes to be a high performer, to be what it means to be an effective leader, pursuing your passion. Take one of these nuggets of information and apply it to your life today. And when you do that, that is where you'll start to reach your next level of greatness. So have an amazing rest of your week, and I will see you in the huddle next week. Have a great day, everyone.